Welcome everybody this evening. My name is Paul Finch and I work at Designated Medical, and it's my pleasure to welcome you this evening to our third webinar in our series of Building a Successful Private Medical Practice webinar series. Today's event is going to be really informative and I'm sure you're all going to enjoy it. But before we get down to introducing the speakers and more about the event, just a little bit of housekeeping to let you know about. We are recording this session because we will be using it for future and sharing a recording to the webinar so other people can see this as well. And if you want to come back to it and watch it yourself. We also encourage you to drop some Q&As into the button at the bottom of your screen throughout the webinar. So if you've got any questions you want to ask as you hear our speakers, please pop them in the Q&A. We'll keep monitoring them and we'll answer them at the end of the session. So we'll keep this quite fluid, the session, and then we'll answer any specific questions at the end of today's session. And also, if you want to use the chat facility, please feel free to put in their general comments or anything that doesn't fit into the Q&As, and we've been monitoring that as well, and we'll pick up anything that's in there at the end of the session again. So next slide, please, Simon. If we can have a look at the next slide, let's tell you a little bit more about these webinars. So as I say, the webinar series, this is the third in our series of building a private practice. And we've really set these up to help to be really informative and act as a guide to help you, whether you're just starting out in private practice or whether you want to grow your existing private practice. And by doing so, we want to help you avoid the common pitfalls and mistakes. So in that process, it will hopefully save you time and money, and you'll get things going a lot quicker and generate more revenue for your private practice. If you have missed any of the previous webinars that we've held, we will be sharing those as well, so you can watch the recordings of those. I would recommend that you sign up to our newsletter. I'll send links at the end of today's session so that you make sure you get all the dates about past webinars and also future webinars as they become available. So let me tell you a little bit about who Designated is as well. So Designated Medical is set up to be flexible around the needs of the healthcare practices that we work with. We aim to provide a range of medical support services and business solutions that allows you to look after dealing with the important thing in your practice, your patients, and help you build your practice by establishing that and help you with all the kind of business functions that you need to help grow your practice. So typically we can help with strategic planning, things like marketing, finding your patients, building a website, if you've got an existing website and you need to create one, and all that goes with that, how to communicate effectively and build your patient awareness. Following on from that, we also assist with operational side, so things like medical PAs through to medical billing, ensuring you get paid on time and the money comes into your private practice. And then that's also followed by our financial management support. So we have a team of dedicated accountants and bookkeepers who are specialists in the medical field. And again, they can help with reports and keeping your practice up to date with the latest things to help you kind of keep profits coming in. And we aim to offer these services to be flexible and tailored. And our goal is to help you succeed because we realize that your success links into our success as well. So let me introduce this evening's speakers. First of all, Jane Braithwaite, who is the Managing Director and Founder of Designated Medical and Designated PA. Now, Jane has first-hand experience of running and growing a medical practice, and that's what led her to create Designated Medical back in 2013, after seeing the need from private practices for business solutions to help those practices develop and grow, and that's where Designated Medical developed from. And also Simon Marrett, who is a specialist in starting businesses in the healthcare sector. He's got a wide range of experience, particularly with a background in marketing, and he helps businesses set up and grow and develop their practices. So those are our key speakers for this evening. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over firstly to Simon, who will tell you a little bit about webinars 1 and 2 before getting to tonight's webinar.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks for the introduction. Nice to meet you all this evening. Thank you for sparing your time to listen to us this evening on our webinar. Paul mentioned webinar 1 and 2 that we covered back in April and May. Webinar 1 was all around preparing for success and getting started. It was talking about the vision and the value proposition around your private practice, the importance of really clearly defining that, having a really clear understanding of why you're moving into private practice, and your unique selling points, your USPs for your clinic. We talked about the importance of business planning, and you are running a business when you move into the private sector. So you do need to think about revenue, profitability, and do that budgeting in advance. So there's a number of techniques we went through on that webinar that you can look back on, or do get in touch if you want any of those frameworks. Webinar 2 is very much around the launch phase and marketing your medical practice, about product and pricing, about the ability to quite succinctly and clearly describe your practice to patients and how you can deliver tangible benefits to them, and making sure that's consistent in all your comms that you have out with your marketing, whether that's on Google AdWords, whether that's on social media, whether it's in your email marketing. We also talked about promotion and place, about the type of practice that you're running and where you can advertise and market yourselves to attract the right patients. Because obviously when you're starting out, you have no private patients, so you need to start somewhere. So what are the best channels that you can use, to acquire those patients? And then once you have them, obviously you need to make sure that you retain them in certain medical fields. So making sure that they come back, they leave patient reviews, etc. So that's what we covered in webinar 1 and 2. Now, one topic that's come up, a hot topic that comes up time and time again, both in the webinars, but also in between the webinars, has been around CQC. We've had a lot of questions around that. Now, initially, when we thought we'd run these webinars, we thought we'd do 3 before the summer. We've managed to squeeze in an extra one at the end of this month around CQC, just because we've had so many questions. So our expert, Gabby, is going to be running that one for us at the end of the month. Just so you're aware, those that weren't on webinar 1 and 2, there's about a 6-month waiting list at the moment. So if you are thinking about applying for CQC, you do need to bear that in mind. And we do recommend that, with the new self-assessment framework, that expert consultancy and guidance are recommended. Yes, you can go it alone. There are many tools out there, but typically we see the best outcomes from actually working with an expert like Gabby in this field. So webinar 3, what's tonight all about? It's all about running. So we've done the kind of planning, we've done the launch. What about running that private practice, about making sure that it's going to thrive, understanding the finances and what we call key performance indicators. Those, how do you know that your clinic is performing well? So today I'm going to touch around processes, the importance of building good, solid processes into your practice, the importance of documenting those practices, making sure they're not just in your head, but everybody knows about them. I'm also going to touch on technology and the tech stack. What's the technology that's going to underpin your private practice, and the importance of selecting the right patient management system for your clinic. There are dozens to choose dozens out there to choose from, and it's quite difficult when you're starting out to understand which one is going to be right for me. Jane is then going to come in and cover both people and the importance of kind of clear roles and responsibilities within your clinic, and how to build that high performance team. And then we'll touch on finances and KPIs and the important areas such as budgeting and billing, accountancy, bookkeeping, all of those areas that we need to cover. So that should take us hopefully through to about sort of it's about half an hour. And then we'll have plenty of time for a Q&A afterwards. So firstly, processes and the importance of building those into your practice. It's very difficult to scale and grow your practice if you don't document these processes and you don't communicate them. So typically what we do, and this is more relevant for those existing practices that are already kind of out there, is we would normally go through a patient journey audit. So you get into the granular detail, that idea of a mystery shopper exercise or a mystery patient, looking at both a new patient experience and existing patient experience, and kind of auditing that journey in quite granular detail. We'll talk about mapping that perfect patient experience and developing a gap analysis, looking at those tasks and actions that can help you deliver that perfect patient experience over time. And the importance of making sure it's consistent, that you don't let those processes slip. It's very easy to kind of get into bad habits, and after 6 months find that all that good work you did has gone down the plug hole, and you actually kind of slip back into those kind of bad habits. I think it's really important here to mention that, for the purposes of CQC, but also the performance of your clinic, that you need to document these processes. You need to train your teams, whether that's the doctors or whether that's the admin team, into what that experience looks like. What are those processes that you expect from your clinic? And then the idea of clearly communicating them as well to your teams, but also to your patients too, so they know what to expect. And Jane's going to touch on this later, but this idea of continuous improvement, constantly reviewing what you're doing, looking at patient feedback, looking at doctor feedback, internal feedback, and looking at ways in which you can do things better, and slowly improving the performance of your practice. So we'll start with the patient journey audit. Now, I would recommend doing this for both new and existing patients, so because it is very different for both. The best way to touch on this is really to look at, break it down to 3 stages. You've got your pre-consultation, you've got your on the day, and then you have your post-consultation. So pre-consultation really is that journey from, when someone first types your clinic into Google, what is being returned to them via the Google My Business page? Are you featuring the search engine rankings? What's coming back? Then if they make an inquiry and they submit an email inquiry, what's coming back to them? What if they want to make a booking? What about the payment process and billing? All of these different steps have lots of different aspects to them that you need to look at. What about once they've registered with you? What about appointment reminders in advance of their appointment? Then we look at on the day, what happens on the day. Now that'd be different if you're a digital clinic or a hybrid or a physical clinic. What does that patient greeting look like? What about the experience in the waiting room? What about that 30 minutes pre-consultation? What about the welcome from the doctor? Is it consistent across your entire practice? And then post-consultation on the day, does the patient get a summary letter? What about the post-consultation communication? All of that's really important on that day. And then we move into the kind of post-consultation phase, which is around things such as patient review emails going out, please leave us a review. Typically in private practice, and certainly the practices that I've worked with, a courtesy call or email 3 or 4 days after that consultation is a nice touch. Follow-up reminders, what happens, in terms of reminding patients that they need to book a follow-up. And then you move into the kind of marketing phase, which is around, okay, how are you going to contact and communicate with your patients over time? So newsletters, blogs, webinars like this tonight, other useful info that you can share with your patients. So breaking it down into quite granular detail, you'll be able to see exactly what that kind of current patient experience looks like. You can then map it in, using this type of kind of, model. There are many models out that you can use, but think about what your perfect patient journey then looks like. Go through that kind of mystery shopper exercise that we've spoken about, things like automated emails, phone scripts. Are your patient care team all working off the same script? It's important that they're saying the same thing, or you might find that they're all saying something different about your clinic. Consistency is really important. What you want to be, you want to get to a point where whoever that patient speaks to, whatever time of day it is, whichever doctor they meet, they're going to get that consistent patient experience that you want to deliver for your practice. And don't forget to manage expectations. So making sure that you present this on your website and in your communications to ensure that patients know what to expect. Now, I touched on this on webinar 2, which is like once you've mapped that perfect patient experience, you need to then look at, what are the people, what are the processes, and what is the technology that is underpinning that. So first you need to look at people. So you need to look at both the clinical team and you need to look at the non-clinical team. How are those people involved through the process? And Jane is going to touch on this a little bit in her people section. Then you need to look at your processes. So what about the onboarding and patient registration process? What happens to them once they're registered in advance of their initial consultation? And what about in between consultations? What about repeat prescriptions? What about follow-up consultations? Testing and investigations are all important. And finally, you're going to rely on your technology to back you up here. It needs to underpin what you're doing. So selecting the right mix of technology that's going to help remove some of those manual processes, automate it, free your time up so you're an efficiently run clinic. So once you've done that, we go into a stage like or an exercise called a gap analysis. And this is a really great thing to do as a team, with your practice team. So you identify the actions and tasks that you need to close the gap between what your current patient experience is and that future ideal state. So on the right hand side, you'll see that we've got people, process, and technology. So you can color code these, put it on a big kind of like sheet on the wall. You can do it digitally if you wish to. In the top left-hand corner, you've got your high priority tasks and actions. So these are high business value or impact and relatively easy to execute. So what you should be doing is, prioritizing these in your team meeting, and you should be delegating responsibility to get them done within the next month. In the top right-hand corner, you've got your work in progress. Now, these can deliver high business value and impact, but they may be relatively difficult to execute and may be quite resource heavy. It may take 12 months to deliver this work. It may be a new clinic that you're looking to launch or a new set of services, but it may be expensive. So you need to plan and project manage this, break that work down into smaller chunks of work with a team, and then delegate that. It's work in progress. It's quite a lot of heavy lifting there, so you need to break that down. The bottom left-hand corner is your easy wins. So these are very light on resources, relatively easy to execute. They're not going to deliver, game changes for your kind of like your clinic, but actually they're pretty easy wins. These should be delegated to your junior members of your team to action over the course of the next 2 or 3 months. And in the bottom right-hand corner, we have a rethink and park. Now, these are, very difficult potentially to deliver, resource heavy, and actually, they're not really delivering a huge amount of impact. So there may be something, a nice idea that's come up in a team meeting. Oh, it would be great if we could do this. Fantastic. But actually, unless it's delivering value to the business and it's not going to take up a huge amount of resource, then why are you doing it? And that's the idea of kind of rethinking. So a very simple framework, something you can take to your next practice meeting, have a think about how you can utilize this with your practice. So that's processes. We're now moving on to kind of technology. So think about that tech stack that you'll be using to run your practice. What is the mix of technology that you're going to be using to run an efficient and thriving practice? Now, the biggest area that we're going to cover today is around patient management systems, but this will include your email technology. It will include your marketing software that you're using. It will include your phone system. It will include a lot of different technology that you need to be thinking about. The key thing here with patient management systems is you need to define your practice's requirements. Every practice is different, depending on what you want your system to do. You also need to plan ahead. So, what's right for you today may not be right for you in 12 months' time or 3 years down the line. So making sure that you're choosing a practice management system that's going to work for you, not just today, but as you grow in the future. You also need to think about other technology. So what about payment partners? How are patients going to pay? Are they going to pay by credit card? Are they paying by direct debit, over the phone, online? What about accountancy software? What about your end of year accounts? What about your customer relationship management? How are you going to email your patients kind of going forward? What if you want to send them a newsletter? What if you want to invite them to a webinar? So you need to think about how your other technology you're going to be using is going to integrate with your patient management system. So we then move on to, okay, so how do I choose which patient management system is right for me? What are the criteria I'm going to use to help me make that decision? And what we recommend here is that you break it down into must-haves, good to haves, and nice to haves. And again, this needs to be a collective decision across the clinic in terms of what you need. And what I've done on here is just jotted down some ideas in terms of what we've used before in terms of selecting patient management systems for our clients. So efficiency and automation. So automation is a real buzzword at the moment. Is it going to free up your time? If you're spending a lot of time on manual, actions and tasks, is this system going to free up that time to allow you to spend more time with your patients, allow your admin team to perhaps deliver a better patient experience over the phone and via email, or improve the website, whatever it may be? What about support and training? Is it included? A lot of the new systems that are coming through, support and training is included. When I looked at this last, there are a number of companies out there that still will charge a setup fee to bring your system on board. They will charge you for support by a certain number of hours per month. So every time you call up or email in, you'll be charged for that. And training is extra. But there are also other patient management systems out there that include that as part of your package. You also need to be thinking about return on investment. So, how is this patient management system either going to help you reduce your costs or deliver more revenue for you by improving your systems? So something that your CFO or your finance director will probably be pressing home with, but something you need to consider. And is it easy to use? So it might be easy for you to use, but what about the other doctors in your clinic? What about your admin team? You are part of a team. What you don't want is to bring something in and 3 months down the line find that all your doctors hate it. They can't use it, and actually you're going to have to switch systems, which is going to be very expensive and time consuming. What features and functionality do you want? What's a must have? What's a good to have? What's a nice to have? Online booking is becoming more and more popular now, as we see more and more practices actually enforcing payment up front. Whereas if we go back kind of 2 years ago, a deposit with a credit card and then payment after the consultation was very typical, but we're seeing that landscape change. We've already talked about integrations with other systems and finance and billing. And a really important point here is about what contract are you entering into? Make sure you read the small print. What you don't want to be doing is entering into a contract for 3 years, finding that the system's no good, finding that then it's very expensive for you to get out of. I can tell you from experience, when I was running my own private practice, that switching out a patient management system from one to another is very disruptive, it's very expensive, and it's very time consuming. So you need to get it right. Make sure you're making the right decision when it comes to choosing the right system for you. And this is just one methodology that we use with our clients in terms of helping them make sound, practical, rational decisions around which is the right one for them. It might be that you love the sales guy that's come into you and presented to you and done a fantastic job of selling, you know, the patient management system that he represents. But ultimately, is it going to do what you need it to do? So list out your must-have criteria on the left-hand side and go through as a group exercise, you know, a way of scoring these patient management systems against your criteria on the left-hand side. You know, so you can see here, patient management system 1, you know, yes, it's very cheap. It's scoring very well in terms of easy use and monthly cost, but it doesn't really save you time. You're going to have to pay extra for support and training. It doesn't have any API integration. So is it actually going to fit for purpose? Whereas patient management system 2 perhaps is slightly more costly, but actually support and training are included. It's got all the key features that you want, and it integrates with all your software. So that's the winner, you know. And it may be that then you want to demo it, you want to go into a little bit more depth, but it's a really good starting point to select. You know, there are dozens of systems out there. So again, just making sure you're making the right decision. Other considerations, we already talked about payment options and providers. So does it integrate with Stripe or Go Cardless? What are you going to do about billing? A really important consideration. What about private medical insurance and the PMIs and health code? Does that come out of the box as standard, or are you going to need to pay a developer to integrate it with something else? APIs, you'll hear a lot about their application programming interfaces. I'm non-technical, but typically what it means is, does your technology speak to other technology in an easy way? And many of the good new systems out there are fantastic when it comes to APIs, integrating with Stripe, Xero, MailChimp, HubSpot, all of the technology that you're going to need going forward. So that's enough from me on processes and technology. I'm now going to hand over to Jane, who's going to talk you through people and the finances.
Lovely. Thank you, Simon. And again, thank you all for joining us this evening. Yes, as Simon says, I'm going to talk about people, and then I'm going to go on to talk about finance and KPIs. So starting with the people aspect, we've talked a lot already this evening about patient journey, but I'm going to use that to help see how your team impacts at each stage of the patient journey. And then we'll look at your team in a more sort of traditional way by looking at an organogram, which I think we're more used to, so we can look at it that way as well. And once we've talked about everybody who's involved in your team, we can then talk about the different employment options that are open to you and the pros and cons of those. And then finally in this section, I'll just talk about how you build a high-performing team. So yes, next slide, please, Simon. So this is the patient journey slide that Simon showed earlier, and I always like to look at everything through the patient eyes. And as we work through this, we can see which different parts of your team contribute at different stages. So if we look at the initial stage, which is about attracting patients to your practice, you know, we're really relying on the marketing team to contribute, and whether that's through your website, through newsletters, through social media, but bringing patients into your practice. And then when the patient does contact your practice, the person who contributes there is the medical secretary. Typically, a patient will call and they'll have lots of questions, and your medical secretary will play a key role in reassuring that the patient and ensuring that they book an appointment to see you. And then the next stage is, you know, I'm going to assume that this is a face-to-face consultation, but this is really sort of the big day. It's the day where the patient meets with the doctor, but they may meet with other members of the clinical team. So they may meet a nurse, a receptionist at your clinic, other doctors. And so that's when they get to see, you know, and the wider team. And then following the consultation, the medical PA will take over again to make sure that all of the outcomes are followed through. And that might be organising further tests or scans. They will also liaise with the practice typist. In most cases, there will be letters that need to be typed up. The medical secretary will then ensure that those are sent securely to the patient, to the GP, and to whoever is relevant. And then we're through the next stage is the billing team. So, you know, really the same day or the day after, we need to make sure that your billing team raises the bill for that patient treatment. So that might go directly to the patient if they're self-pay. It might go to the insurance company, but we need to make sure that's done promptly. And then that sort of patient journey is complete, but we then go back to keeping in touch with that patient, which again, we need the marketing team to be doing that through newsletters and social media, and just keeping your practice at front of mind for that patient. So next slide, please, Simon. So now we're looking at the team in a more sort of traditional way. And what we can see is the organisation chart shows, we typically see the founder and clinical director. That's usually the founding doctor. But in the middle there, you can see other members of the clinical team, whether it's the nurse, doctor, it might be an HCA. So you've got your clinical team. To the left, we've got the admin and operations team. So you might have a practice manager or a clinic manager. And then supporting the practice manager, you will have one or more medical secretaries. You may well have a typist. So that's your sort of operations team. And then the right-hand side, other business support functions like commercial support, then your finance team, your bookkeeper, and your accountant. So that sort of gives you an overview of the team that will be involved in running your business and the people that you will need. And there are options open to you in terms of how you build your team. There are three main options. You can either employ your team, so you can employ individuals, which means you become an employer. You have responsibilities as an employer in terms of health and safety and management and other aspects. And you'll also be running payroll for your team. So you'll be responsible for pension, national insurance, and so on. So becoming an employer is a significant investment in your time and financially, but it is the right option in some cases. Your second option is to use a service provider. And I'll talk you through this example in a moment, but a service provider will typically be someone who specializes in a particular area. So it might be a marketing service, it might be an accountant, but they will provide a service to you, and you will have a contract in place for that service provision. And then the third option you have open to you in most areas is to employ a freelancer. So this will typically be someone who's self-employed. They work on their own, and you would have no responsibilities as an employer, but you would be involved in management. Obviously, your freelancer would need your direction and your guidance. So just to bring this to life, one of the most common decisions we see doctors having to make is their medical PAs. So when you're looking at your medical PA, you've got the option to employ somebody either full-time or part-time. In terms of the pros and cons, I think if you want your medical PA to be working at your clinic, then this is probably the best option for you, is to employ them. You then get the sense that that person is making a long-term investment in your clinic. They're dedicated to your clinic. And so there's lots of pros from that point of view, but it is expensive. As I said earlier, you're responsible for salary, national insurance, pension. Something that people often overlook as well is holiday. People are entitled to 5 weeks holiday a year, and all of that has to be covered, and that's an additional cost. So employing someone is one option. Your second option is you could use a medical PA service, which gives you a lot of the benefits in that you will have a medical PA who is dedicated to your practice, but you don't have any responsibilities as an employer, and the costs are reduced for you. It's also particularly good when you're growing your healthcare business. So on day one, you might only need your medical PA to support you for an hour or two each day. And so with a service, you only pay for the time that they're working for you. And then as the months go on and your practice increases in size, obviously the medical PA service provider can be flexible and can provide you with more support. And then your final option, as I mentioned earlier, is you can employ a freelancer. Again, the costs are likely to be lower. You have fewer responsibilities as an employer. In terms of the downside, sickness cover and holiday cover is an issue. If your medical PA is unable to work, they won't typically have cover. And we don't hear about it so much at the moment because of everything else that's going on in the UK, but IR35 keeps popping its head up, and that is something to think about if you're looking at employing someone on a self-employed basis. So those are the sort of options that are available to you. And I will re-emphasize, it is important to think about the pros and cons of each one for you. And the final thing I would say is that, 10 years ago, when someone was opening up a new clinic, there was an assumption that everyone on the team had to be in the office or in the clinic. I really think we should think about it differently now and think about that clinic space is very much about the patient. So the only people who should be in the clinic space are those that are treating the patient. And those people who are providing the support services can be based from home or in another environment. And for the obvious benefits is, instead of having a consulting room and an office, you can either half your accommodation costs or you can have 2 consulting rooms for the same cost. So, I would just think very carefully about who really needs to be office based. So that's that one. And finally, on people, we know when we think about how we enjoy working and we read any of the management information on this, in terms of ensuring your team works to the best of its ability, one of the key things is making sure that everybody understands what the objectives are for your business and they understand how they contribute towards those. So that is the key thing to do in bringing the team together, is to make sure that they know how they're contributing to the business strategy. And supporting that is having the right kind of culture. We know people like to work in an environment where it's open and they feel safe and they feel trusted. And when they work in that culture, they're much more likely to contribute ideas and be proactive and go above and beyond for the business. They're also much more likely to be able to raise concerns and raise issues, knowing that those will be treated with the culture of let's look at how we can improve it, rather than let's look at who did something wrong. So the team culture is really, really important. And I've just mentioned improvement. I think you want to make sure that you get these things right on day one, but it's really important to build in a process that allows for continual improvement, whether that's a monthly meeting or however you do that, to make sure the team can still can understand how well the business is going and look at how things can be improved over time. So I think that brings me to the points I wanted to make about people. And I just want to talk about the financial side now. Now, I've highlighted 3 activities from a financial point of view, which I think are absolutely key. We could spend a whole webinar talking about each and every one of these. So I will just try and go through them relatively quickly. The most obvious one, I think, is billing. It's really important that for every patient you see, we ensure that a bill is raised promptly, whether it's to the patient or whether it's to the insurance company. And most importantly, we make sure that the billing team follows through to ensure that that bill gets paid. One of the things we see a lot is doctors coming to us who've got a lot of age debt where the invoices haven't been paid. So that's a really important aspect of your practice management, is to make sure that's the case. Online booking is changing that and making that better, because people tend to pay when they book the appointment, but that's not the majority of cases. So billing, really, really important to make sure you've got some strong processes there. Bookkeeping is really keeping track of all your expenditure. And again, what we tend to see is that people do their bookkeeping at the end of the year when the accountant needs all of their information to do the end of year accounts. I think it's really important to do the bookkeeping every month. I think if you leave it to year end, you probably will miss a lot of the things you've spent money on, which means you're not claiming them as expenses, which means your profits look higher than they really are and you'll pay more tax. So, there's good business sense in making sure your bookkeeping is always up to date. In terms of reporting, I would encourage you to produce a monthly financial report. It doesn't need to be hugely detailed, but just a summary of the income, the expenditure, so you know what your profit is, and keep an eye on age debt. And that's a report that I would be inclined to share with the whole team, so they know exactly how well the business is doing. Accounting, that obviously relates more to year-end accounts and your tax return. And then finally, budgeting. Simon mentioned this earlier about thinking about the future, budgeting for expenditure, whether that might be additional equipment, additional employees, a new clinic location, but, you know, thinking about budgeting for the future so you can ensure you hit your business goals. And then my next slide. So I've already talked about sort of doing a monthly review of your finances, and, you know, your finances, I would say those are a key metric or a key performance indicator, a KPI for your clinic. But there are probably other metrics and KPIs that you want to be reviewing on a monthly basis. And the choice that I would suggest you choose 4 or 5 KPIs that you and your team review regularly. And the choice of what those KPIs will depend, what they are, will depend very much on what's important to you, what your objectives are, what it is you're trying to achieve. So, for example, if you are looking to attract most of your patients via your website, then probably a number of your metrics should relate to your website performance. So looking at things like the number of people looking at your website, how well those visitors are then converting into appointments, you know, and really looking at your website performance. Another example of a good metric is number of new patients booking each month. So particularly in the first few months when you're operating, you want to make sure you're attracting more and more new patients every month, because that's how the business will grow. And of course, over time that might change. You might then start to look at different things like retention, where you're looking at how many of your patients are coming back to see you again 6 months later or a year later, or whatever's appropriate for your speciality, but starting to think more about retention as well as attracting new patients. So that really brings me to the end of my part on people and finances. So I will hand you back to Simon at this stage, who will summarize everything for us.
Yeah, thanks, Jay. There's some really good points there, I think, relating to both, you know, the importance of people and building that kind of culture for high performance, but also, you know, finances and KPIs. So yeah, just to summarize there, really, webinar 3, processes. Hopefully, you know, what I demonstrated was the importance of building those solid processes, getting, you know, it's no good just being stuck in your head. You need to document it. You need to communicate it to your team. You need to train them to ensure that you're going to deliver that consistent patient experience that will help you grow and scale the practice. Technology, you know, we talked about patient management systems and how important they are. There is so much choice out there, you know, but you need to find the right one for you. So using that selection criteria that we went through, understanding exactly what you want it to do. It's an expensive mistake to choose the wrong technology, so the wrong patient management system. So make sure you get it right first time. People, which Jane touched on, building high performance team, clear roles and responsibilities. I think a really good exercise too, in terms of understanding the differences between, you might think that you want to employ someone to come and work at your clinic, but when you're starting out, you may not need somebody full time. You may just need them for 2 days a week, you know, or 4 half days a week while you're in clinic, and then you can build that over time. And finally, you know, finances and KPIs. So good financial systems, good processes. It doesn't need to be huge, doesn't mean it needs to be massively detailed, but a monthly meeting where you can look at the finances, you can look at the KPIs, just to understand both the financial performance, but what are those KPIs that are driving your business? Where can you improve? So that's webinar 3. Hopefully it's been useful for you all. We do have time for a Q&A. I'll just move on to the next slide. Give me a second. We had any questions that we have? Paul, have we had any questions while we've been speaking?
We have. And first of all, thank you both, Simon and Jane. I'm sure everyone will agree those insights were really, really useful and set the scene on how important processes, technology and people play in the success of your private practice. And we've had a few questions come in, but just a reminder, if you have any, pop them in the Q&A or the chat if you find it easier, and we'll answer as many as we can tonight. The first one that's come through is a question, can you please elaborate on the IR35 HMRC complications that was mentioned at the end? I think that was something that you maybe mentioned, Jane.
Yes, yeah, I'm happy to pick that one up. Yes, so we haven't seen so much about it in the press recently, but basically the IR35 regulations are designed to ensure that people who are being employed as self-employed, to protect those people when really they should be employed. So what HMRC are looking at is, you know, if someone should be employed, they should be entitled to national insurance, PAYE, paid holiday, and all of the other benefits an employee should have. So there are certain rules. In fact, on the HMRC website, there is a questionnaire you could do to see whether you are compliant with, if you are a self-employed person, to see whether you are compliant with the IR35 rules or not. Basically, it's if you had someone who was working as a self-employed medical PA, working for one doctor, there is a strong argument that that person should be employed by the doctor, and therefore they should be entitled to all of those employment benefits. And that, I think, is what HMRC are trying to crack down on. Now, they've done it a lot in the IT industry, and they have talked about rolling that out further. So I think it's something we just need to be mindful of as time goes on. If you've got a medical PA who is set up as self-employed and they're looking after 5 doctors and they've got a contract with each one and they've got their own computer and they're managing it as their own business, then that, I believe, that would be compliant. It's more about when someone's being employed on a self-employed basis, but really they should be employed. And I think we've seen it with Uber and maybe a couple of other organizations where employees have argued that they should be employed, and they are then entitled to payment for holiday, national insurance for whatever period they've worked for that employer. So it's quite punitive if it's proven to be a problem.
Excellent. Thanks, Jane.
I hope that answers the question. You know, if there's anything specific you want to come back to on the chat, then do let me know.
Yeah, we've just had a nice response saying great, thank you. So I think that was a great explanation. Thanks, Jane.
Yeah.
So another question that we've had is, would you recommend a particular patient management system? That's an interesting one. I don't know if Simon might want to go first with that one, then we'll get your view as
we
well,
thought
Jane.
that topic might come up, but you know, we have you know, we have good relationships with all the patient management system kind of companies. Obviously, we know the market very well. We've all had experience of using different systems. So I think we have our own preferences in terms of the ones that we like to work with for very good reasons. I think the landscape has certainly changed a lot over the course of the last sort of 5 or 6 years. There are a number of kind of like incumbents that were there, which were quite expensive in terms of you know, the setup costs, often with the data transfer from an existing system over to that one. As I mentioned in my presentation, in my slides, you know, training and support was paid for on top. I think what we're seeing now is a number of new companies coming into the market that are disrupting, you know, the way things are done. And I think it's actually, the systems are very good. There's much more flexibility for doctors. You know, you're not tied in for long contracts. There's a lot more included. You pay on a monthly basis. They're cloud-based as well, which is really interesting, which means that you can work remotely, or as Jane mentioned, in terms of your you know, your admin setup. So medical secretaries can work from home. It doesn't need to be downloaded onto a fixed terminal. And I think what we're seeing is the majority of the clients that we work with are preferring to go in that direction with a handful of really good patient management systems that have got a great reputation in the market. Now, if you want to contact us afterwards, obviously please do. You know, we wanted to remain neutral for today, but yeah, there are some really good systems on the market. They don't have to cost you know, they don't cost a lot. I think when you look at some of them and you look at the monthly cost, the work that they're doing in terms of driving your practice and running your practice on a monthly basis, actually from an ROI perspective, they're delivering fantastic ROI. So I'm being neutral, Paul, but I think that answered the question in terms of what to look out for and what we think is important.
I think that answers the question really well. Thanks for that, Simon. And we have had another question come in which expands on that a little bit further. It says, excellent webinar, so thank you very much for that feedback.
Thank you.
But in terms of costs, how much should I be thinking on initially if I want to start a medical practice from scratch on my own? So that's a really interesting question. Jane, would you like to go with that question?
Yeah, and yeah, no, I mean, it's a great question, and I think it's exactly, you know, one of the first things people should consider when they think about starting a private practice. What are the costs involved? Because clearly there are some costs that need to be budgeted for before there starts to be income coming in. So it is really important. It's hard to put an exact figure on it, Patricia, without knowing exactly what it is you want to do. So, you know, one of the big deciding factors would be if you plan to start your own clinic where you're going to be taking on a room or rooms, you know, at a clinic location, then there are going to be a lot of expenses associated with the accommodation. If your plan is to work from one of the large hospital groups, so say you were going to be working at a Nuffield Hospital, then obviously the costs associated with the accommodation are much lower. The things that you have to spend money on, as you know, as Simon's just talked about, I think you can't really start without a patient management system. So you have to allow money for a patient management system. That's really, really crucial. I think you have to have a website. In fact, it's part of this, well, it's part of the CQC process. So if you're going through CQC, you absolutely have to have one. But to be honest, I think if anyone in private practice now does need a website, so you need to allow a budget for that. And you need to think about the budget you will need for other marketing activities. Then obviously, you know, as we've talked about tonight, you are going to need a team to support you. So it's a cost associated with that. So it's hard to put a sort of exact number on it. But, you know, we could, I guess, you know, if you wanted to, we could have a chat and we could kind of go through and go item by item, you know, roughly what budget would we allocate to each one. Simon, I don't know if you want to add anything in your experience, because obviously you've been through this process a lot.
Yeah, I think I covered this a little bit in webinar 1, but I think the importance of that kind of budgeting phase, you know, and again, do get in touch with us if you're starting out and you don't know, then we have frameworks that you can use, you know, in terms of, you know, what are those kind of cost lines you need to be thinking about. As Jay mentioned, are you going to be a physical clinic? What about kind of, you know, patient management systems? You need to think about where you're going to attract your patients from. You know, there are CQC, there's a cost attached to CQC. You know, you may need to bring in a consultant to help you through that process. Medical PAs, and again, but a lot of things, you know, that like this can start small. You know, you don't need to have a full-time PA. You don't need to have the patient management system up and running if you're going through the CQC process. Even things like insurance, you know, you don't need indemnity insurance, you know, for your clinic until you start to see patients. You can get the quotes, and that will suffice for CQC purposes. So, you know, a lot of the mistakes that we see from clients who approach us is actually around how they've incurring cost already at a very early stage when they didn't need to. And actually, you know, have a chat with us. We can provide you with some frameworks, give you some indicative kind of pricing in terms of what you need to be budgeting for, and we can help you through the process.
Excellent. I think that's great, both Jane and Simon, for sharing that, and Patricia and everybody else. We will be sharing our contact details in a few slides' time, so please do take note of those details and arrange a consultation. We can go through everything individually, which I think is a good way to do that. And we have had another question come through. This is related to when do I hire my medical PA? Is there a best time to do that? Again, it relates to setting up that private practice. So who would like to go first with that one? Jane, would you like to start?
Yeah, I can take that one. I mean, I think the answer is you need to have a medical PA available when you launch to manage your practice for you. So if you're planning to start seeing patients, say you were starting to see patients on the 1st of July, you would need to make sure that your medical PA was all set up and ready to deal with those inquiries and manage those patients before the 1st of July. Important to remember that prior to the medical PA starting, you would need to set up the patient management system. So, you know, when we work with new clinics, what we tend to do is we tend to work with the doctor to get the patient management system set up, and then the medical PA will immediately start from there. You want to have some time with your medical PA to make sure they understand exactly how you want your practice to be run, and to make everything sort of bespoke for your processes and your style. So really, you know, you need your medical PA to be in place a week or two before you go live. As Simon said, you don't want to employ them too early so that they're sort of sitting around and you're potentially paying for a service that you're not using.
Excellent. I think that's great advice. Simon, do you have anything else to add on that?
No, I think this is Jane's area of
yeah,
a specialist subject, so I think her answer is perfect.
Excellent.
You know, there's one more thing I should mention about setting up a patient management system. You know, when you are given your patient management system, when you first log in, what you'll find is the system is all there, but none of it is set up for your practice. So there is a process to go through in terms of setting up your clinic schedules, your letter templates, standard letters, you know, and that can take a couple of days to do. You know, we've got a number of medical PAs who are trained in doing that, and we allow them 2 days just to go through that setup process. So it's important to build that into your timeline as well.
Excellent. Great advice, Jane. Thanks for that. And just for those who would like a one-to-one, I've popped in the chat facility a link to our email and telephone number if you would like one-to-one chat to talk about that in further detail. We have one other question, which I'm guessing this might more relate to Simon initially. What CRM would you recommend using? So, Simon, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, happy to take that one, Paul. I think there are, not dissimilar to the answer, I guess, with the patient management systems. There are a number of good CRMs available on the market. I think, again, you know, you need to assess the market and have a look at what's available. Typical names you'll see will be things like Zoho, HubSpot, MailChimp are quite kind of common. You know, I would recommend, again, that define what you need from it. What's good about these systems, but they are closing the loophole a little bit, is they do have a free package. So when you're starting out, you can upload a certain number of kind of contacts to them. You can use some of the functionality. You don't need all of the functionality that's in there. So actually, you know, you can sign up and actually start using it quite quickly without actually incurring any cost. It's only when you start to get up to a certain number of patients, and you want to send a certain number of emails per month. But when you're starting out, you're going to be below that benchmark. So actually, there's no need to go and spend a lot of money on a monthly basis on a CRM to start with. So, but those are the ones we typically recommend. I think what we're seeing with the patient management systems as well, that they're becoming smarter. They want to integrate with these kind of CRMs. So I hope to see where we've seen integrations with the finance systems like Stripe and like with Xero and with HealthCode. I think what we'll see as a next step is when they start integrating with CRM, so that you can actually have that functionality built in. So you've got one place to go for your technology. You don't need to go in and log into lots of different systems. So again, you know, do get in touch. We can point you in the right direction, give you the pros and cons. But the ones I mentioned are typically the sort of market leaders.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Simon. And just look, there's no more questions there at the moment, but if anybody does have any questions, you want to pop them in now, we'll watch them coming through, or if you want to get in touch after tonight's session, please feel free to do so. So I think at this point, we'll move on to the next slide and we'll round up today's webinar. So again, I hope you all join me in thanking Jane and Simon for their insights tonight. And what are the next steps then? So the key thing is, if you want to speak to a member of the designated team, get in touch. We offer a 45-minute consultation where we'll offer some advice on how you can start and launch your private practice. There's our email address on there, and I've popped it in the chat if you wanted to take a note from there as well. And also get involved in our private practice success WhatsApp group. And again, the link is now in the chat facility. If you want to click on that link and join, this is a safe space where you can just share your thoughts and ideas with us and colleagues, and just share ideas, and we can help you, point you in the right direction if you want any advice in that format as well. And above all, don't miss our next webinar, webinar 4, which Simon mentioned at the very beginning. We've managed to squeeze this one in before the summer break for most people, Thursday the 26th of June, on CQC registration and how to navigate the registration process. And as Simon mentioned earlier, there is a long waiting list for CQC, so it is important to put this as a top priority if you are just starting out, to look at this sooner rather than later. So if we can go on to the next slide, please, Simon. This will tell you a little bit more about what's going to be covered in that webinar. What I will say is, don't worry too much about writing all of this down, because tomorrow we will be sending out an email to everybody who's attended this evening with a recording of tonight's webinar, so you can go through it again and listen to those key bits that you might have missed and want to go over. But also, we'll include in that email a link to sign up and register for this webinar on the 26th of June. So watch out for that email coming tomorrow. Sign up via the link or visit our website for further information to register your place.
Paul, I might just want to add that that will be the last one that we'll be running before the summer. we are planning to extend the program into the autumn. So we've been talking this week around subject matter relating to medical indemnity insurance. I think there's some other topics that we're going to be looking into in terms of private medical insurance as well. So there's a whole host of different areas that we're going to be looking into. What we'd ask for is that, can we hear back from you? What do you want to hear from? What would you like to hear about? You're the ones that are setting up in private practice or already have your practice established. So we can adapt our program for the autumn based on your feedbacks and what you want to hear about. So like I said, get in touch with us through the email address that Paul has supplied. And then we'll be announcing that, I think, over the summer, Paul.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks very much for that, Simon. And as Simon says, yeah, very much designed around what you need and want as well. So please do let us know. And that was a great segue, because it's allowed me to pop into the chat a link to our newsletter sign-up form as well, because the best way to stay in touch and find out about the webinars as we release them is to be registered on our newsletter. So I've popped a link in the chat facility if you did want to use that as well, and sign up to our newsletter to ensure you don't miss out on future webinars when they're launched. And finally, just to end, there's our contact details again. Please do get in touch. We'd love to have a chat with you and see if we can help you on your journey through either launching or growing your private practice. So once again, thank you to Jane and Simon for tonight's session. I wish you all very well in your journey going forward. And that is the end of tonight's seminar. So thanks very much for coming along, and we enjoy hearing from you in the coming weeks and months.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, everyone, for joining.